Hi, Angela here with temporaryhomeschooling.com by the Alt Ed Marketplace. Today in this video, we're going to talk about activities, what they are, and how to use them with your daily plan recipe and your sample daily plans. So here's an example of a sample daily plan. Yours might look slightly different because you might have a different sequence of activities out here on the outer ring, but otherwise it should be the same. You'll notice that in the middle, we've talked about this in another video, in the middle, we have this gray ring of what we call segments. Segments are simply buckets of time in which we're going to fill with the various activities that we're going to talk about today in this video. So there's two main types of activities. The first are daily activities. These are things you're going to do every day, regardless of the day. One activity type you might see is called goal setting. It's this little target here, okay? And this is all about setting specific goals, learning goals with your children about what you want to get accomplished in that day, okay? Now, if you don't see this goal setting icon, you'll probably see this daily plan icon. So, like goal setting, it's all about intentionality and deciding, kind of scheduling out the day, right? But it's less about the actual specific goals and more about just setting that schedule and reviewing that schedule. So if you're not quite ready for goals, or maybe that's just not your focus for your temporary homeschooling journey, that's totally fine. But that's what you might see instead, is that daily plan there. So these two activities are all about setting that intentionality, as I mentioned before. They're all really important also to make sure that your children have as much ownership as possible over the schedule and over their learning process. You want to equip them to take on as much of that as possible. And then it's also about setting expectations. So everybody knows how the day is going to unfold and what to expect. And then also things to look forward to as well. So it's nice for everyone to be on the same page and in sync in terms of the timing of the day, right? And the rest of the day and how it's going to go. Additional daily activities that you might see are one, a checklist. Checklist is simply a sequence of tasks or actions that equip your child to accomplish something. So this might be a morning checklist or a bedtime checklist, for instance. And those can be very helpful, especially for equipping your children to be more independent and autonomous. This next icon is for cleanup time. This is all about building good habits and minimizing stress in the household. We all know how hard it can be to be in such close quarters with each other, and then when everyone's making a mess and nobody's cleaning up, it can get to be very stressful. I know it is for me. So that little cleanup icon is to remind us to have those good habits and make sure that we're cleaning up a little bit at a time so that we're not stuck with a giant mess at the end of the day. You'll see this little icon here is a transition activity icon. This is all about transitioning from a higher energy portion of the day to a more low key portion of the day. You'll see this between segments C and D. And so this is all about that transition, managing that transition, okay, and building some rituals and routines around that. This might look like yoga or meditation, right? Or we do dance parties where we're getting all of our wiggles out and we're slowly winding down. And we're winding down because we're heading into this next activity, most likely, which is quiet time activity. That's that little shh icon there. This is downtime. It's really important for everyone, not just our learners or not just for mom and dad. We all need downtime. It's our chance to rest and reset and recharge for the rest of the day. And so that might look like a straight up nap. So if your child is young enough to nap, that's nap time. If you're older and you still want to nap, that's great too. You should definitely take advantage of that. The other option might look like dear time we do in our family. So dear stands for drop everything and read. So those are two examples of quiet time activities, but you can define those and negotiate those with your children as far as what quiet time looks like in your own house. This last little daily activity icon, this is reflection. It looks like a little mirror. This is all about closing the learning loop and thinking through, how did our day go? What have we learned so far? Where have we been? And then where do we want to go? Not just for the rest of the day, but also the next day or throughout the next week. Okay, so it's all about closing that learning loop, reinforcing a growth mindset, And also, it's a great chance to incorporate a little bit of gratitude and mindfulness, right? Thinking about the things that we're really grateful for and really taking in this moment, okay? So it's a really, really important part of the day, and you definitely don't want to skip that guy. All right, the next activity types are what we call our mix and match activities. So this makes up the components, the bulk of the choose your own adventure component of your schedule. Okay, so we have 5 different categories: core skills, life skills, enrichment. Enrichment is basically like interests and hobbies and passions, right? Any sort of activity that's aligned with your child's interests, hobbies, or passions. We've got family time here, and then we've got free time here. Okay. All right, so I'm going to give an example of an activity. And so let's say our example of our activity is baking a cake. One thing that's important to remember is that even the simple act of something like baking a cake, an activity like this, it can actually span, depending on your focus, span multiple categories, right? And that's totally okay. So you want to keep it simple, and you want to really think about these activities through the lens of these different of each of these different focus this focus group. So for instance, when you're baking a cake, you could be working on core skills being reading, writing, and math. There's a lot of math involved in baking, right? There's also reading if you're reading a recipe. There can be writing if you're writing down an ingredients list or you're creating your own recipe, right? If you're doubling the recipe, you're doing math. So if your focus is core skills, you can still bake a cake, and that might be, the focus for that particular activity. The simple act of baking a cake is also a way to work on life skills. Preparing food, learning to cook is a very important skill that they will need to carry on, especially as an adult. And so baking a cake could be a really great way to explore that and to develop those skills. Baking a cake could also qualify as an enrichment activity. Say you have a child that's really into baking or really interested in the chemistry of cooking, right? Baking a cake, that could also be a really enriching activity and could be aligned with their interest in cooking. Regardless of whether or not you work on core skills or whether they see it as a life skill or you're pitching it as an enrichment activity, even if you just spend time as a family doing something fun and you don't worry about anything else, that can be a great family time well spent, right? Especially with baking a cake, because at the end you have a dessert, a reward, right? So that's an example of how a simple activity like baking a cake could qualify as a core skill activity, as a life skills activity, as an enrichment activity, or as a family time activity, depending on what you decide to emphasize. Okay. So that's the one thing that's really important to remember about these categories. Again, don't get too caught up in them. But these are merely suggestions, and then realize that different activities can certainly double, as activities for multiple categories. The last one I want to talk about is this little free time icon. And it's really important I didn't want to gloss over this. Free time is really important, and you definitely want to make sure that your children have plenty of free time throughout their day to pursue their interests and hobbies and just for natural, spontaneous discovery and learning. Okay. That said, you might consider putting boundaries or guardrails around it. For us, sometimes we'll say, okay, it's free time in our schedule, but the one stipulation is it's screen free. So we have other times where we get to watch screens, but this time, this is free time that you have. Do anything you want, except you cannot be on a screen. There's other times we might say this is free time and you can do anything you want, but you need to be outside, right? So there's various ways that you can add some boundaries and guardrails around that free time, but then still make sure that they feel that freedom and that they get that room and that space to play and to learn spontaneously. So this is really important time. It's learning time. And so you definitely don't want to skip it. All right, so those are the main activities that you will find in your daily plan recipe and your sample daily plans and what they are. If you have any other questions or need some tips and tricks or activity ideas, you can go to temporaryhomeschooling.com. You can also scan the QR codes on your daily plan recipe, or your sample daily plans with your smartphone camera. Scan that QR code and it will take you directly to your custom homeschool kit where you can access tips and tricks and activity ideas, etc. as well. All right, we'll see you next time.